Then we go to Carlos with a question.
It's a really specific question. So when I work in behavioral design projects, normally my challenges tend to be to design, a behavior wants someone to do, something that has to happen. But sometimes I have to design something to, like on the other side, like I want to avoid or want to diminish the amount of behavior that something's happening, right? So my question here is, I'm trying to upscale my behavioral, my gamification experience here in the company I'm working on. I already did the onboarding. I want to, move forward to day-to-day in a consultancy company. So my question here was, I'm sure I understand that I have to design the gamification experience based on desired actions, but what happens if I'm not really clear maybe of a specific desired action, but my objective is like an undesired action, like again, like I want to avoid, for example, people leaving the company. So basically I want, for example, I was thinking about some elements that I could use to make it more engaging or more fun, the job you already have to do. So let's say, I don't know, you finish a project and you earn a badge, or you earn something that really reminds you, or you make a ceremony on how this experience was very interesting as a team, and you remember, like you share those battle stories, or you share your marks of war and stuff like that. But my point here is that those ideas are not coming at me thinking about a desired action. I want you to do something you're not doing right now, but more like I want to avoid an undesired action, that is that you quit. So I don't know if I'm missing a piece here, or are there any tips on how to design gamification experience based on undesired actions instead of desired actions?
Yeah, that's a good question. So this deals with the, and I think we've discussed this topic a few times in the life coaching sessions, but deals with the questions of anti-core drives, right? So usually you have the user in the middle, and there are things you want them to do, and their desired actions, and then pretty much everything else are undesired actions, but some are, I guess, even less desirable than others. And the thing is that every action is through these A-core drives, right? So if they're doing it, it's because of the A-core drives. They're doing the undesired actions because of these A-core drives too. But in our case, we call it anti-A-core drives. So whether something is considered a core drive or an anti-core drive is based on who you are, right? And I don't know if you've ever heard my spiel about the example of, let's say, you're a startup and you want to convince someone to leave their big corporate job and join you as a startup. And so the desired action is to leave the big corporation, join the startup, right? And the undesired actions stay at the corporation, and they might use different core drive to say, hey, look, here you can get to change the world, and you get to have a lot of control, a lot of autonomy in core drive 3, and get to work with a really cool team, that complements your skills, and it's really exciting. Every day is very different, right? So now from the corporation standpoint, their desired action is for the employee to stay, and leaving the company it's undesired action, kind of like you mentioned. And they might use other core drives to say, like, well, core drive 2 is this is the most prestigious company in the industry, so you should really stay. Core drive 4, you have a stability and whatnot. Over here, you have a good paycheck, scarcity. You're actually just 6 months away from your stock options vesting, or your cliff or whatnot, or you're due for a promotion, whatnot. And then loss and avoidance, it's very risky being a startup, right? So based on who you are, who the designer is, the A-core drives would be conflict with each other. And there's a variety. And so supposedly, if you want people to stop doing desired actions, then you make the desired actions more appealing, especially if the desired actions are conflicting with, like if you do desired, you can't do the undesired, or you remove the A-core drive scenario for the undesired actions. So in that case, just from a communication standpoint, but there are some potential designs to do communication standpoint. It's like, hey, like the startup can then say something like, well, even though the anti-core drive is, this is prestigious, it's stable, and scarcity, loss and avoid startups are risky, they could probably address it saying, well, look, yes, your company is very prestigious, but you've already been there for 3-4 years. It's already amazing on your resume, right? Just staying at your big company for another 2 to 4 years isn't going to be more prestigious or add to it. So CD2 is doesn't really count. And you think it's very risky to be at a startup. Well, in a startup, in 3 or 4 years, yeah, if it doesn't work, just go back to working at big companies. But if it's successful, in 2 or 3 years, we could change the world, where we could really and you never have to worry about money again, right? In 2 or 3 years, imagine like 2 or 3 years in your big company really means like almost nothing, like no additional improvement of your life. But 2 or 3 years in a startup, it could be a make or break thing in your life, right? So you start addressing these 8 core drives. There's some game design techniques that help, or implementations. One that came to my mind is the recruiter burden. Recruiter burden is specifically saying if you recruit people into an endeavor, you feel a little bit worse leaving that endeavor because you feel like you have to be kind of responsible for those people there. So it wasn't necessarily created this way, but that's the Octalysis group, right? What we have is we have the system of, we start with mentorship. So we have new people join the Octalysis group, and we're like, all right, well, you know, we're kind of like a free moving organization. We're all remote, and we're kind of always busy doing projects. And we wanted a little more stable anchor for onboarding. So it's like, all right, you're the mentor, go help this person, right? So they're mentor, and then after a while, new people join. It's like, all right, you're the mentor. And so eventually it's like, but mentorship before was more like, yeah, you help them for like 2-3 months for their onboarding, and then you kind of, now you're equal colleagues, right? And so it doesn't really matter. I think somewhere last year, I just thought, hey, let's do a tree. Like, who is your mentor? Who is your mentor? Who is your mentor? And then they're like, oh, this person. It's like, oh, why don't you guys like become like a family? Just like, and there's like 4 or 5 big, good like families in the company. And why don't you create a name for it, right? And so now like people are thinking, oh, okay, now I have this CD4 and potentially CD1 about my family. And Sabrina, who also started the OP, like a lot of people start the OP. She is actually one of the original Kickstarter funders. She said that, you know, the other day she says, wow, she's been in Octalysis group for 6 years. And before that, she's never kept a job for more than, I think, a year. And she says, and I'm a grandma. And what that means is that she has a mentee and her mentee has a mentee. So she's the grandma of the family. So again, you do designs. This is just a random example, right? But I think because of that, people might be less inclined to leave because they feel more ownership. They feel like, well, I'm the elder in this family, and I don't want to disappoint people in my family. Of course, if everything else sucked, right, they still want to go, right? But of course, there's a lot of other white hat motivation core drives. There's epic meaning and culling. There's feel accomplished. There's a lot of autonomy and all that stuff, social appreciation. So yeah, I think creating a great white hat environment, as we know, this is about long-term happiness environments, and some techniques that build into ownership, whatnot, helps. And then if there's a short-term trade, it's the same design strategy, right? The short-term, like, you know, someone is really considering leaving, then having some kind of black hat, like, oh, you know, just 3 more months and you reach some kind of big milestone, or loss and avoidance, like you'll be, you know, like we have this big, we have a doc. I mean, this is not going to be a huge motivator if people really, really want to leave, but we started putting together this big TOG storyline. Like when someone first reached out to me, like wrote their email, and then 3 years later they joined OP, and then they won this competition. So we have this whole tree, this whole storyline of how everyone came to this journey together, and then people notice that there are people who were in TOG before that's no longer in TOG. They're not part of the story. And I just mentioned, yeah, like the story only considers people who are still here because they're relevant. If they're gone, they're irrelevant to TOG. And it's like, so you better, and I was just joking around. I would say, so you better not leave or else you get erased from history, you know, because this is not a serious like CD8 design. But again, it's like people, if it's just a short-term thing, black hat works. If the long-term white hat helps, right? So I think there isn't necessarily a totally different strategy when you're just motivating people to not do desired actions. So it really boils down to, you either make desired actions more attractive so people don't want to do undesired actions, or you remove the appeal of undesired actions. You remove the 8 core drives from those undesired actions, and you even mentioned like, oh, like that job pays a lot, but your friends will think you're a loser. So it's like, oh, anti CD5, maybe I shouldn't join this I don't know, this controversial company. So yeah, I think again, similar methodology, just a different way to think about it.
Awesome. Thank you so much.